It's the weekend and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome, welcome. It's the Jill on Money show. This is the program that attempts to take the mystery out of your financial life. Attempts, it's not always so easy. We are broadcasting from the Capital One Bank virtual studios. Capital One, this is Banking Reimagined. What's in your wallet? Today, we are devoting the end of the summer to a topic that really needs a little bit more love and tenderness. I'm talking about we're going back to school with the bond market. And to mark the occasion, we are lucky because we got a great guest. Her name is Kathy Jones. Kathy is the Senior Vice President, Chief Fixed Income Strategist at Schwab Center for Financial Research. And she's just a total bond geek, which is great. That's what we need. So in this interview, this hour, you're going to get a little bit of the basics of bonds. And you're also going to get Kathy's great explanation of why bonds need to be in your portfolio. Here's our interview with Kathy Jones. Kathy Jones, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Well, so tell us a little bit about how an English major becomes a bond maven.
Well, it was a bit of a circuitous route. I started when I was in college as a runner at the Chicago Board of Trade. I went to school in the Chicago area. And the reason I got that job is I needed a part-time job. And my brother had a friend who worked there. And my brother said he'll literally hire anybody so you have a shot.
That's great.
Yeah. So I went down there and I was running tickets into the corn pit and soybeans, and I just fell in love with the markets and went on to get my master's degree. And one thing led to another.
Wait, you never went back to commodities?
I did commodities for a long time, but I haven't done them for probably 20 years now.
So you and I share something, because my first job on Wall Street, I was a gold, silver, and copper options trader on the New York Commodities Exchange.
Oh, I'm sure we know some people in common then.
Yes, some of them are in jail, I presume, but some of them may not be. Some of them are fine. And many of them are just like, sort of playing virtual games with all the money they made. Kathy, how long have you been at Charles Schwab?
Almost 10 years now.
So first of all, what is it about the bond market that you like? Why do you like covering this market?
Well, it's different every day. I like it because it's driven by a lot of the macroeconomic information that's out there. And frankly, the math makes sense to me, where I always try to understand equities and I get kind of tied up in knots because the math doesn't always make sense.
It's so funny you should say that, because I feel the same way. That I feel like a mathematical equation I get a coupon, I get a duration, I get all those things. And I even get commodities, which is supply and demand, and also just, crazy emotional stuff. But the idea of stocks, that they are always priced at the, sort of in the long run at the right levels, I don't get that. I mean, I don't get why in the midst of a pandemic that is now flaring up again, at the moment where we could see $600 a week vanish from so many Americans' weekly unemployment insurance, how is it that you think that stocks are just going up? What do you think's going on?
Well, it seems to be the idea that the people in the equity world like to look farther out, I suppose, and they're making the assumption that we get the pandemic under control, go back to normal, and everything will be fine, or that they've identified the handful of stocks that are going to come out of this having benefited. But this is why I don't do equities, because I just don't get it.
I love that you say that. I say the same thing. I keep saying every time someone says to me, what's going on? I say, I don't know. And the people at CBS will even say to me, like, can you file a report on the stock market today? What do you want me to say? More people were buying than selling. That's about as good as it gets. So now talk to us a little bit about fixed income. Right now, what we know is interest rates are at 0%. So bond yields drop down. and that means prices are up. So why should bonds remain part of an investment portfolio or a retirement account?
There's a couple of reasons that we typically suggest people hold bonds irrespective of the yield. So, one is it for diversification from stocks. So, most people will have an allocation to equities. That's for the growth long term in the portfolio, but that comes with a lot of volatility. Bonds typically have much lower volatility, especially things like treasuries and investment grade municipal bonds and investment grade corporate bonds, because there's a lot less risk of default or capital loss. And so you get that diversification. So earlier this year, when the stock market went down, the bond market went up. And so if you have a portfolio that's balanced, you're getting a big reduction in volatility. And you're also getting something if you go to rebalance, maybe your bonds have gone up as your stocks have gone down, you rebalance, you're actually able to sell high and buy low. So diversification is a big part of it. Income's another part. Bonds deliver income, and all income is positive. So if you hold to maturity and there's no default, capital preservation and income are there for you. And then finally, there's a planning aspect to bonds. Again, bonds that don't default, the higher quality bonds, typically will deliver coupon income on a regular schedule, and when you get your principal back. And that's great if you're trying to plan out cash flows over the years.
So when you look at the individual bond market versus bond funds, and I know that Schwab has a ton of great bond funds and bond index funds. Can you talk about the type of people who you think it would be more appropriate to buy a bond fund or a bond ETF rather than the individual bond?
Sure. So, there's pluses and minuses to any way you want to invest. Someone who would be appropriate for a bond fund is someone who's looking for a lot more diversification per dollar invested. So, to have an individual bond portfolio, we typically suggest you need a fairly sizable account to get enough diversification within the portfolio in case there is a default. With a bond fund or an ETF, you're, of course, getting a lot of diversification for every dollar you invest. And then some people don't want to be bond fund managers. They don't want to do credit analysis. They don't want to worry about the duration. They want somebody else to do that. They need the professional management. And that is a big advantage to having a fund. And then finally, you get better pricing. So a mutual fund manager, an ETF, they're buying in big lots and buying maybe hundreds of thousands, if not millions of bonds at a time. They're going to get a better price than an individual investor will going out and buying maybe $10,000 or $20,000 worth of bonds. So some of that pricing, the professional pricing or institutional pricing, can reduce or offset some of the cost of the fee for the ETF or the mutual fund.
And obviously, if you're using a bond fund, I'm sure that you would recommend the dividend reinvested into the fund, at least if you don't need it, right?
If you don't need it, it's a good idea because you compound the income that way and your total return ends up being higher in the long run.
We'll get back to our interview with Kathy Jones in just a second. If you've got a financial question, or maybe it's just a question about anything that's going on with the bond market or something Kathy says, send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And yes, we are deep diving into the miraculous world of bonds. Did you know that bonds come in all shapes and sizes and flavors? That's what we're talking about in this part of our interview with Kathy Jones from Charles Schwab. Check it out. More of our interview with Kathy Jones. So let's talk about the different flavors of bonds. You mentioned the plain vanilla government bonds because the government is not going to go broke, God willing, right? In corporate bonds, there are high yield or junk bonds and there's investment grade. So what is the differential right now in the yield on higher yield versus the boring, safer companies?
So in a high yield or a junk bond, you might be getting 5%ish in terms of yield, depending. There's a range of yields within the high yield market for the upper end to the lower, the very, very junky stuff that's, triple C rated. There's going to be a range in there because there's more risk of the lower rated bonds defaulting. But say you get 5%ish on an investment grade corporate bond, you get about 100 to 150 basis points over treasuries. You're going to get 2%ish plus in that sort of an investment.
How do you determine, or how would you advise our listeners to determine just how much risk they should take? Because obviously, the whole point of the higher yield is that these are companies that are riskier. So 5% sounds better than 2%, but you're risking that some of these companies could go broke and you don't get your money back. So, what is the right, sort of generalized thought process around the division, say, in a bond portfolio between higher quality, lower quality? What's your recommendation?
Well, right now, our recommendation is to stay higher quality. Part of that is because corporations have taken on a tremendous amount of debt. Part of that's reasonable. Money was very, very cheap, so why not borrow it at these low levels if you can employ it in a productive way? But we think a lot of the lower quality companies, these high yield companies, are really at a disadvantage during the pandemic because they have a lot of debt. Maybe their business model isn't working particularly well, so they're at much greater risk of default right now than they might have been pre-pandemic. And we are starting to see those defaults tick up. So in the high yield world, the default rate is over 7% now. We think it could go as high as 9 or 10%.
Wow.
Yeah, we think we're not through this recession yet, and there's going to be a shakeout. Not everybody gets supported either by the Federal Reserve's programs or by the economic stimulus. So we like staying up in credit quality. If you're going to be in high yield, we think be at the upper tier in high yield. And even within investment grade, we like the higher rated because there is a risk of some downgrades as time goes by.
So you're basically a wimp, and I love that about you already. So because that to me makes so much sense. And I know that there's a lot of money being raised by companies. They're going out and borrowing money. And I keep hearing from some of the investors out there that, hey, I don't care. The Fed's going to buy corporate bonds, so I'm okay. What's the misstep in that thinking?
Now, the Fed's not buying all corporate bonds. So what they have pledged to do is buy investment grade bonds and a handful of high yield bonds that they call fallen angels because they were downgraded from investment grade to high yield after the pandemic started. So after March 23rd. So there's a handful of bonds there. And the reason the Fed committed to doing that is that these are often very large companies that have a lot of employees, and they wouldn't have been downgraded to junk had it not been for the lockdown, the shutdowns that we went through. So they want to provide them support because they don't want to see hundreds of thousands of people laid off from these companies. So the Fed's buying investment grade corporate bonds with maturities only out to about 5 years, and a handful of high yield bonds and a handful of ETFs to provide liquidity to the market. So there's a lot of bonds that aren't going to get that support, and the Fed's not necessarily going to bail them out. So right now, in the initial stages, the market said, oh, great, the Fed's buying corporate bonds, just buy everything in sight. Now, the prices have gone up, and not everything is going to survive. Not every company is going to survive this. So we'd be much more careful now than, say, in March when the Fed was initiating this.
You wrote recently in response to an article that was published in The Atlantic that had the very clickbaity title, "The Looming Bank Collapse." And the subtitle was, "The US financial system could be on the cusp of calamity. This time, we might not be able to save it." This is by Frank Partnoy. And I have to tell you, it's so funny because my uncle, who is a pretty rich dude in Australia, sent me this article immediately and said, "You see, the whole thing's coming down House of Cards." So would you mind just giving us a bit of an explanation of why you think there is some merit to this and why there may not be some merit to this.
Well, I will disagree with the premise that the banking sector is going to collapse and we can't save it and all the hysterical part of that article. And the premise of the article is comparing CLOs, collateralized loan obligations, with CDOs, which were the instruments that collapsed during the great financial crisis and which almost did bring down the banking sector. So they're, not to get too far in the weeds on this, but they're structurally very different. So CLOs are tiered, and banks typically own the top strata, the AAA rated of those tiers. In order for the AAA rated tranche to collapse or the structure to collapse, you would actually have to go through all the lower tiers first, which means you'd really, really need a huge rise in defaults on these underlying loans that are made to the banks. CDOs were very different. For one thing, they were leveraged, and you didn't need much of a default rise for that to collapse. And that was one of the big problems. And there were also, a lot of derivatives tied to that. And so CDOs were almost constructed to fail in their own way. CLOs are just a very different, simpler structure. Could there be a rise in defaults? Certainly, but it doesn't look like the bank exposure to this is very large. Certainly nowhere close to as large as it was with the CDO market during the financial crisis. So it's not apples and oranges, but it's certainly oranges and tangerines, maybe.
I like it.
Very different flavors.
Okay, you're a macro person also, right? That you like to look at the big picture. And if there's going to be a potential rise in defaults in some corporations, I guess the next worry for me is these cities and states, these municipalities. So a lot of our listeners own municipal bonds. Is there something they should be worried about right now?
Well, I think our advice there is similar to what it is in the other parts of the market, to be in the higher credit quality municipal bonds. This pandemic has hit municipalities, state and local governments very hard. So their tax revenues are collapsing because businesses are closed or people are unemployed, and their costs are going up because much of the cost of unemployment is borne by the states, and some of the other costs related to the pandemic have been borne by the local state and local governments. So it's been a perfect storm for them. What state and local governments have been doing is cutting back their expenditures. So we've seen over 180,000 government employees laid off just in the last month or two. We'll probably see a lot more layoffs if they don't get some relief, cutbacks in services, and maybe some downgrades of the municipal bonds. I'm not worried so much about a rise in defaults outside of maybe a handful of, small hospitals or something related to property where the tax revenues are going down. I'm more worried about maybe seeing some downgrades because the revenue stream is just not there anymore, or not in the way it was, and it could be 2-3 years before it gets back.
We'll get back to our interview with Kathy Jones in just a minute. Hey, during the break, why don't you do this? Why don't you go onto our website, jillonmoney.com, and there you can read all the great stuff that we have put together for you and check out our resource section. jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are finishing up our interview with Kathy Jones. She's from Charles Schwab. She's the Chief Fixed Income Strategist, also a Senior Vice President. And we've been talking about the bond market. Fancy, we can call it fixed income because that sounds fancier, but it's bonds. And I always like to ask this question for people who are really smart and very focused on one area of the financial markets. And that is, what is going on in the universe that makes them nervous? What keeps them up at night? And these are not the things that should keep you up at night. I want to reiterate that. These are the things that on a global macro level, big picture, what is it that worries people like Kathy? That's what we want to find out before we let her go. So here's the conclusion of our interview with Kathy Jones. So, what keeps you up at night amid the pandemic besides your own personal health and your family's health? Like, what is it about this situation that you think really bears a lot of attention right now?
I think it is the health of the states and the local governments, because that's really critical to getting the economy back on its feet. And then I'm, of course, very worried that our response to this hasn't been as robust as it could be. And that has implications for people, obviously, and their health and their well being. But it has the potential to really change certain sectors of the economy. Higher education is one that could be going through a very big change, retail. And when we go through these very massive changes, it's really disruptive. So the slower we are to get the disease under control, the worse these disruptions are going to be, and that concerns me.
We talk about different shapes of the economy. I see that you had a commentary out with some of your cohorts, Liz Ann Saunders and Jeffrey Kleintop, about the shape of the economy. So, what do you think the shape is going to be?
Well, yeah, there's so many letters and shapes running around. I guess I've been in the kind of Nike swoosh category where we had the big drop off and then we kind of bounce back and then we just gradually get better. But it takes a number of years. I don't see how this getting back to where we were won't take 2-3 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you had to give some of your great wisdom to individual investors, what are some things they should be thinking about for the second half of the year and beyond? Like, really, what is it that you're fearful of that people could do in the future? And what can we prevent? And how can they take advantage of what you think is likely to be the next couple, 3 years of tough times?
Yeah, I would say the first thing we usually, when I'm talking to clients, I say, know what you own. If you haven't looked at your portfolio in a while, or you haven't really paid attention to what's in there, sit down and really go through it and say, would you buy this tomorrow? If you didn't own it, would you buy this security, whatever it is, tomorrow at this price? And if the answer is no, you should start thinking about what you should do. The other thing is everybody should have a reserve. We're going to see more layoffs. I'm afraid more tough times ahead. If you haven't built that up, make sure that you have something that's liquid and safe that you can count on in case of an emergency. And then the other is just once you get a plan in place that lets you sleep at night, just don't pay too much attention to it because it's going to go up and down. And sometimes you have to just walk away and say, okay, I'm good now. I'm going to let it be.
Well, thanks so much to Kathy Jones. We're going to have her back because, things are changing so quickly. But if you want to check her out, she writes a lot for Charles Schwab. They do a lot of really good stuff. It's free. You don't have to actually be a client of Charles Schwab to access this. Check that out. Kathy Jones, once again, thank her so much for joining us. Before we finish up this segment, I think we've got some time for an email or two. This is from Alan. By the way, just reminder, if you actually have a question, send an email, ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Alan writes, I'm a longtime pre-pandemic listener, and I have loved not just the daily podcast, but the weekend specials. Thanks for all you do. It's amazing that something like this podcast can help us feel not alone. Oh, that's so nice. I love that. Alan continues, I'm 32 years old. I'm married. I've got 3 small kids. I have $25,000 in retirement so far, another $20,000 in an emergency fund. Because I am a minister, I chose a few years ago to exempt myself from Social Security. I worked for a decade outside of the ministry, and I already have my 40 credits, so I'll get something, but it'll be small. As a minister, he makes $60,000 a year. And he says, I currently invest $10,000 a year. I've heard others say to aim for 15%, but my question is, how much extra should I invest since my Social Security net is so small? Thanks again for your wisdom. Why did you pull yourself out of Social Security? I don't get that. Is there a reason to do that, Mark? So he doesn't have to pay Social Security taxes, I guess? I mean, I would be putting in at least 15%, number one. Number two, is this a tax planning move on your part so that you actually do not have to pay taxes on the Social Security taxes? I don't know if this makes sense. You should at least be putting 15% away. And maybe without Social Security, I would even say 20%. I presume you're using a Roth IRA because you have earned income. So that would be the smartest way to get that money to work. And then anything extra can go into a non-retirement investment account. But the Roth IRA will allow you to put $6,000 a year away. And I think that would work. But can you just clarify the whole Social Security thing to me? I always have a problem with that. Social Security I know the taxes stink, but I think you're going to want this in the future. My 2 cents. All right. You're listening to Jill on Money. And when we return, we're going to get back to more of your questions. Here's an idea for you. During the break, why don't you check out our sister broadcast? It is called Jill on Money, and you can get it on Apple or Stitcher or Spotify or radio.com or Google Play or anywhere else you get your favorite podcast. And if you don't know how to get a podcast, ask somebody you know who can help you. I do this for my mother on a sort of ongoing basis, and I'm happy to do it, even though I know she really doesn't listen. She's like, why do I have to listen to you? I can just talk to you on the phone. See what I contend with, gang? Oh, Mark's father is now a daily listener, and so now I'm going to have to make sure that I do a shout out to him because he's just telling me this. Okay, Jill on Money, we will be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. It's Jill on Money, the program that takes the mystery out of your financial life. And we are always delighted that you join us. And so it's time to answer your questions. If you've got a financial question, don't forget, all you have to do is send an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. That's what Helen did. Helen says, I listen to your podcast every day, and I'm also reading your book. That's so cool. I'm 68 years old. I plan to retire at age 71. I started collecting Social Security 2 years ago when I was 66. I opened up a Roth IRA at Fidelity in 2019 and funded it to the maximum of $7,000 with my after-tax savings. That's so great, by the way, because $7,000 because she's over the age of 50. You can put an extra $1,000 in. Okay. Helen goes on to write, I also established a Roth 457 plan at work over 5 years ago and contribute less than $1,000 because that's all I can budget since I'm contributing the maximum of 10% of my salary. Okay. So my question is, can my Roth at work and my Roth IRA outside of work add up to more than $7,000 together in a year? I received IRA contribution statements for tax year 2019. I didn't get any alerts that I exceeded a limit. I have a modest traditional IRA of $136,000 from a previous job and wanted to also have a Roth. Thanks so much, Helen. Helen, there are two separate things. So one is based on the IRA rules. The other is based on your employer-based rules. So you don't have to worry. I'm right about that, aren't I, Mark? Yeah, I mean, in fact, I mean, if you were making, I'm sure you're limited just by the amount of money you're making, but the Roth at work is a employer-based plan. It sounds like you're working at Municipality because it's a Section 457 plan. Anybody can put up to $19,500 into that, an extra $6,500 because since you're over the age of 50. So you could put even more money into that. So yeah, go for it. I think that works beautifully for you. Okay, Brad writes, I'm enjoying your podcast while driving to and from work. I work as a professional musician. A professional musician and you're working? That's amazing. I can't even believe that. All right, anyway. Brad writes, I have a first world problem. Am I taking too much risk in my investments? I've got 100% equity exposure through plain vanilla stock index funds. Many say to hold on to bonds, but bonds don't perform as they once did. And given today's interest rates, I'm seeing many columns arguing that equities have or should replace bonds for the income portion of portfolios. Here's my status. I'm 66 years old, engaged to a 25-year-old, not a typo. Do you hear what I'm saying? I had paused on that, right, Mark? Let me just do that again. Brad's 66 and he's engaged to a 25-year-old. Not a typo. I hope to reach 90 and possibly become a father for the first time. I make 30 grand in musician income, 25,000 from Social Security, 6,000 from a pension. So, about 60 grand a year. Real estate, $500,000. Portfolio, 2.1 million. Half divided into IRA, SEP IRA, Roth IRA. I live way below my means. I don't intend to tap my portfolio. I've been investing since my early 20s. I've ridden the ups and downs. I have a goal of 3 million just because for no reason but greed. Should I make any moves or would you leave things alone? Mark, what do you think I'm going to say? All right. This is a great question. Go back and and rewind the tape. And let's have Kathy in and give her theory on this. Kathy Jones, that is from Schwab, which is the reason why you have bonds is not just to make money because bonds act differently and there's a consistency of income. I think you're insane to have 100% in stocks, but that's me. Maybe you don't care. Maybe your 25-year-old fiance doesn't care. But I have to say, I think it's just a bad idea. I really do. I think you asked for trouble, and I'm glad that you've been able to manage all of this. I think that that's fantastic. I would very much encourage you to try to reduce your risk, even on just a little bit, and try to get this portfolio in a place where you don't have to worry about what happens to the markets. And I think that you could actually find yourself in trouble if for some reason you need to access these funds. But all right. Anyway, we'll go from there. Nicholas sent an email a while ago and he heard it on the podcast and he was so stoked to hear it. And he said, I ended up getting your book and I love it. So I'm here for round 2. I have a taxable investment account for short-term savings like car, house. It's going to be used in the next 3 to 8 years. I also max out my Roth before anything goes to this. How tax efficient am I? I have picked stocks like Facebook, Tesla, Amazon, Google, Berkshire Hathaway, Netflix, and we'll be adding more. None of these companies provide dividends, so no taxable dividend payments. I was going to add a municipal bond fund for my state, Washington, to make it less risky. I thought Washington didn't have a state income tax. So I don't know. So you don't want to use a municipal bond fund for this. Why are you how much money do you make? Why are you so worried about paying taxes? Nicholas, follow up with me and give me your tax bracket so we can determine whether you need to really be making yourself so crazy. It's a little risky to have all stocks in this kind of an account. That's just my preference. This is must be the high risk part of the show where people just pressing the accelerator down and not caring. But I am not that person. I am a huge wimp. So let me know some more information. Okay, Nicholas? All right, we got to run to a break. When we return, more of your questions. It's Jill on Money. Hey, if you want to buy the book, just go to the website, jillonmoney.com. And guess what? You can buy the book right there. We'll be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money. If you have a financial and economic and insurance, a tax, or any question that has anything to do with money or retirement or college savings or even your career, why don't you give us a shout? Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. And of course, you can always get to us through our website that is conveniently named jillonmoney.com. There's a contact button in the upper right-hand corner, so check it out. Dan writes, I'm a few years from full retirement at age 66 and a half. Last check, my regular IRA alone stands at 7 figures. That's awesome. I'm in the 22% tax bracket. Would it be a good idea to convert my regular IRA to a Roth IRA every year until I'm 66? If it's a good idea, I would be considering converting up to the amount necessary up to the 24% tax bracket. Thanks, Dan. Dan, I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea. And for those of you listening, the reason it's a great idea is not so much about, oh, you're trying to avoid taxes. The reason it's such a great idea is that tax rates are probably going to rise in the future, but also as you get older, those minimum required distributions can really mess up other parts of your retirement. So I would encourage people to take a good, hard look at the amount of money they have in their deductible plans. That could be a 401k, a 403b, a traditional IRA, and see whether a conversion, even just some of the money, makes sense. So the 24% tax brackets, that's a really big, wide range of money. I think it could be, I think it'd be a great idea. So that is I give you 3, 4, 5 gold stars for that idea. Go for it. Okay. It's Jill on Money, and we're broadcasting from the Capital One Bank Studios. Capital One, this is Banking Reimagined. What's in your wallet? When we return, we're going to get to my interview with someone who's figured out a way to try to help companies become more diverse. We'll be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome back. It's the second hour of Jill on Money, and we are delighted that you are tuning in to us today. We are broadcasting from the Policy Genius virtual studios. Policy Genius. It is the easy way to compare and to buy insurance. Just go to policygenius.com to check it out. Well, okay, now, second part of the program, we've got another interview for you because you know what? I like having these interviews for the summer weekends. We do lots of questions, I know, but I think having a different voice is important. We've got a guest who has a very interesting background in corporate America in banking and finance. His name is Dane Holmes. He worked at Goldman Sachs for many years and now is part of a startup. And I wanted to know what's going on. So here's our interview with Dane Holmes. So, Dane, full disclosure, Dane and I serve on the board of a nonprofit together. That's how I know you. But you also were a very early in this idea that you have to actually care about the people in an organization. So can you tell us a little bit about, before we talk about the new company, tell us a little bit about you and your career, because when I first met you, you were working at a place called Goldman Sachs. So what's the story of Dane Holmes? What's the origin story?
Sure, I'll try and give you a brief one. So just a little bit of background. My background is, my dad is Black, my mom is white. I grew up down in Atlanta, and when I was young, I wanted to be an architect. And so I ended up going to New York City in large case because I said it was the first place I'd ever been where I didn't really feel my race. I just felt like people wanted me to get out of the way because they were on their way somewhere, but that felt great. So as I stared up at these giant buildings, but I got my degree in architecture, but after doing an internship, thought this might not be the career path that I wanted. So I ended up going to Wall Street really just because largely I was in New York. And I fell in love with it for really two reasons. One, the analytical rigor that was part of it. And two, because it really was an industry that required both EQ, dealing with people, as well as IQ. And I guess that was the beginning of me realizing that what I really enjoyed about work, what I thought really made the difference or was the differentiator was people, and wanting to work with people, invest in people, build people, and have organizations that were people centric. So that kind of drove my career for a long time.
When you hear about this, when you hear people person or HR, there have been times in the past where people kind of roll their eyes like, "Oh, HR." So can you talk a little bit about how the industry itself evolved, like the idea of managing people and what you found in your career?
Yeah, so there's a lot of cycles and trends around that are actually pretty fascinating. I think it's important to remember that HR largely grew, if you go way back, it grew out of something called personnel. And if you think about personnel, even in just the language around it, it was more about the process of hiring people, the process of having to pay them. And it had certainly had an overtone to it that was much more about managing the risk as opposed to managing the upside. What I think is that there's just been this long evolution within the profession, within people's perspectives of how they think about it, to the point where, the phrase that you often use are people are our most important asset. But this journey to fulfill that comment, to make it an actuality, that when you say people are our most valuable asset, you actually treat it as your most valuable asset. And I think that's a journey that the industry is still on. The one thing that I can say about HR professionals is they care deeply, deeply about their work. They're passion-based people, and they care deeply about making sure people can reach their potential. So from that perspective, I've seen that the whole time.
That's kind of a cool way to actually think about it. I think that the interesting part of this is that, you also, as a mixed race person, come to this whole expression around where we are today in the national conversation with a lot of experience. Was it surprising to you? I know you'd left Goldman Sachs by the time this year's events occurred, but has it been surprising to you to hear the corporate response to the killings, the marches? Like, what is it that's sort of like the upside and downside of this?
I mean, I think on one level, it shouldn't be surprising, and we can certainly talk a lot about all of the breadcrumbs that would lead you to the view that this should have been, and it made sense that this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. As far as corporate America's response, I think that's a journey that they're still on. Certainly, I think it's valuable that they took some of the actions that they did, which were letters of support, writing checks to philanthropies, et cetera. But to be frank, those are the pretty easy steps to take. The much, much harder step will be looking in the mirror, looking at your own organization and your own processes, and see where you've underdelivered or underperformed on attaining that goal of being a meritocracy, attaining that goal of allowing people to bring their whole selves to work. And that is a major work in progress, I think, for corporate America, because while it's been something that, a lot of people have talked about for a long time, I think there's very few organizations who've made it a top priority. And I think there's very few organizations who've probably invested the amount of time and money required to make the change that they need to make at this stage. So they're in early innings of their journey.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference, the carrot and the stick approach? Because obviously, for years, certainly in financial services and throughout corporate America, everyone's, oh, we've got to do better. We really do, and it's really, we'd like you to do this, or we'd like you to be on this committee, or we want to do that, and yet, you know what? I keep thinking to myself, if we said to everyone, let's just use the financial services industry, if we said your bonus is predicated on whether your team reflects the population base or not, people would figure out how to hire more Black and brown people and women.
I think that that's true on one level. I think there is a bit of a complexity with it. The part that's true is that, I definitely am fully in the camp, which is in part why we've created the inclusion index at Escalera, that you can't change what you don't measure. And so platitudes and speeches without, hardcore measurement, and that measurement isn't just in your performance, but that's measurement applied to how you're compensated, et cetera, is a really big part of the formula, and one that's been missing. And we all know, I mean, since I was little, I was growing up, my parents told me, you do that, there's going to be consequences. And we all know that when there's real consequences, you have real behavior change. So I believe in both of those. The one thing that I will say that I believe in deeply as well is a concept of strength-based learning. And that while it's great to have the stick, we should really be having this conversation around how having supporting diversity and inclusion will make you a better organization, how it aligns you more with being a meritocracy, how it is correlated more to being a high performer. When you think about our inclusion index, which has 4 components of it, it has trust, voice, belonging, and growth mindset. All 4 of those characters, which are core from our view of an inclusive environment, are also core with being a high performance environment. I think we have to talk about what's to be gained, not just maybe what has been lost in the process, and that's a mind shift for folks.
We'll get back to our interview with Dane Holmes in just a minute. Hey, during the break, why don't you do this? Go to the website, go to jillonmoney.com, and while you're there, you can check out some of the TV appearances that I do. Just click on that watch tab, and maybe you might want to check out the various resources that Mark has put together. He's so good. So check it out. jillonmoney.com is the website, and we'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. And, in this era where we are confronted with a lot of hard conversations about what's going on in corporate America and the ability to have access to a career that has a path going forward for both women and people of color. It's so important that we have resources. And our guest, Dane Holmes, he's one of the co-founders of a company called Escalera. He comes out of a corporate background. Don't hold it against him. I think they've got some interesting ways to help move the conversation forward. Here's more of our interview with Dane Holmes. All right, so let's talk about the new place, which is called Escalera, which I kind of want to make it Italian, but I don't know. What does Escalera mean?
It's a different language. It's Spanish for elevate. So for us, it's we have the tagline that we want to engage, empower, and elevate, and that is really our goal. That through this work, we're not just elevating women and brown people and people of different sexual orientation. We're elevating organizations and cultures.
I'm on the website, began as a passion project for co-founder Tom Chavez, who is the brother of your former colleague, Marty Chavez, right?
Correct. That's correct.
What got you involved in this? Why leave Goldman Sachs? You are making piles of money. Are you insane? Why would you leave?
Yeah. So, I think life is all about, fulfilling different passions and variety. As corny as it sounds, I believe a diverse life is also a well-lived life. And, one thing that was always true, and maybe this is the part of my early dreams of being an architect that played through. I love building things. Most of my career that I spent at Goldman Sachs, I was either building or renovating something within the organization. And, I got to the stage in my life where, sitting there as the head of HR at Goldman Sachs, where I saw this giant problem of this lack of the leveraging of data in solving the problems that most CHROs face. I also saw that a lot of the technology that was being used wasn't really geared around the employee, wasn't truly putting the employee at the center. And I felt like that was a big mistake. So I had a choice in my mind. I could stay at Goldman Sachs, a firm, that I love, that's been great to me, and try and change it with that organization, or I could build a company that's going to change it for multiple. And I just found myself attracted to the latter. And so thus the change, just the change started.
You've got a bunch of data points on here about how companies that are more diverse are, basically going to make more money, hit financial goals. All of that being said, what has been the barrier? I mean, because we've always heard this. We've heard this about if you have more women on boards, companies perform better. And yet there are not as many women on boards. So what is this wall that is up in corporate America?
There's a bunch of challenges. First and foremost, in the busy demands that any organization is facing, I don't think you can drive any sort of systemic change. And let's just be clear, this is about systemic change. This is not about tweaking things. This is, overhauling the whole system. If it's not a top, one or two priority and it's not heavily invested in over time, you're not going to get that change. So, one just pure problem has been the lack of prioritization and the lack of investment into the area. The other challenge of it is that obviously corporate America lives within a system, and that system supports the behavior. And so it's hard, even within your own system, to fight a broader system that's around you, which is a challenge. But the one thing that I think is the most interesting one, at least for me, in thinking about what has been challenging, it's really 2 points. One is just this idea that a lot of leaders within corporate America have no proximity really to diversity. It's not how they spend their time. It's not who they're invested with. I've had a bunch of conversation with leaders of mine who are white men who are like, "Hey, Dane, I want to do more. I want to figure this out more." And, I've often said a pretty simple phrase. I said, well, the Black population, to use that example, is 13% of the population. Are you devoting 13% of your time, energy, and money with that population? And if you're not, you don't have proximity to it. And, it's been, a cause for reflection in a lot of the conversations that I've had. So I think proximity is a big one. The last one is the classic ego challenge, which, is always a problem whenever human beings are messing up. A part of it has to do with ego. When you say to somebody that the system isn't fair or that you benefit from privilege, the challenge is that people's immediate response is some version of, I worked hard to get where I was. You don't know what I had to go through. You don't know where I came from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you've heard this mantra before. But there's this lack of acknowledgement that there's three things that drive anybody's success, talent, luck, and effort. And the biggest of those is always luck. And privilege is about making you more lucky. And it doesn't mean that you didn't work hard, and it doesn't negate that you have talent. But the fact that the most important thing in life is luck, and that privilege is a massive advantage in the category of luck, people struggle with that because it goes against their own identity of like, I earned this, I made this, I created this.
I interviewed the folks over at Salesforce in a live event, and I was really taken with the idea that they had gone through and done a deep dive into what was going on at the organization in terms of pay. And it was about gender pay equality and racial pay equality. I think the CEO was really shocked when he found out that there was a huge disparity. And so what they did was they wrote $6 million worth of checks to make it right. Is that an effective way to, on maybe every year, to go through and say, like, did we mess this up? Is that an effective way to manage the pay gaps that exist?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the biggest thing that I'll say is that there's no one silver bullet. And I think that is certainly part of the solution. Once again, when you're dealing with a systemic issue, there's challenges on all sides. I think that's a very important one. Another one, though, that I think is really important, which is a harder one, you have to have a multi-year strategy for, is taking a look at what are the highest paying jobs in your organization and see if they are diversely represented. So there's one thing about, hey, I have two people doing something similar. Am I making sure that they're paid fairly in those roles? But then there's the additional challenge of just saying, hey, when I look at the highest paying roles or job functions within my organization, do I have a diverse set of people in those roles? And the answer to that is usually no. And the solution to that is a multi-year solution. You're not going to suddenly, create them out of air, because there's a whole ecosystem that makes somebody a chief marketing officer, or, you pick the role, head of sales, and you're going to have to address the entire pipeline from point A to point B in order to address that issue.
Okay, so Escalera has this thing called the Inclusion Index, which, by the way, everyone listening, it's been trademarked. Don't try to steal it. So you're trying to measure what the performance of the company's diversity and inclusion efforts are. And then what do you do once you have those numbers, once you've measured that? What do you do with the information?
One way to think about it is by being able to measure inclusion and putting that in a quantified form. We have it in a scale from 0 to 100. I am now suddenly able to take that quantification of the inclusiveness of your culture, and I can attach it to all sorts of things. I can attach it to manager effectiveness. I can attach it to productivity. I can attach it to retention, promotion, and the ability for managers to create, strongly performing individuals. So it's a little bit, if you think about it, almost if you're in chemistry, the fact that you can measure temperature opens all these things for you of all of these awarenesses that you can come up with. And that's really what I would argue has been missing. That's the key unlocker. How do I have a way of keeping sustainable focus and investment on something? I measure it. And so that's what's we really think groundbreaking about it. And part of, frankly, what you see in any other effort that a corporation is making to advance, they always have metrics and measurement around it. And we need that around diversity too.
We'll get back to our interview with Dane Holmes in just a minute. If you have a financial question or you've got a question about your own career, why don't you give us a holler? Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. That's askjill@jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
.401ks, IRAs, refinancing, she covers it all. Back to Jill on Money with Jill Schlesinger.
You're back. It's Jill on Money. This is the program that hopefully sparks a little conversation with yourself in your head and maybe with others around you. Maybe it's about your own financial life, but maybe it's about things beyond your personal financial life. We have been talking to Dane Holmes. He is one of the co-founders of a company called Escalera. And Escalera is trying to figure out a way to propel the conversation around diversity and inclusion. And they're doing this by actually diving deep into the information at every organization. I think the most important part of this is essentially that when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, you got to come clean. You got to come clean with yourself if you're running the organization or you're a leader of an organization, and you got to come clean with the staff. You cannot ignore this. This has been ignored for too long. Here is the rest of our interview with Dane Holmes. So how do you guys make money? I'm a big company or I'm a small company. What do I do and how are you making money?
We are two things combined together. We're an employee experience platform. Through that platform, we give learning, skill development, behavioral nudges, and we do that around both inclusive practices as well as leadership practices. And so that is one part of the service that we're provided. And the other part is that analytics piece through that learning process, being able to gather, sentiment and measurement around inclusion. The nature of most of our contracts we are done on an employee per head basis. And so people will partner with Escalera, we'll work with them, we will educate, give knowledge and skills to their employees. Through that process, we'll also be able to give them deep insights into their organization around inclusion. And they pay us per head to do that, and that's how we make money.
So let me ask you a question. You've now moved from big time corporate America into startup land, and you're also a CEO. How has that transformation felt for you?
Yeah, so you got to. It's been great. I have to separate it into two pieces. Some of what I will say for some people would view as a negative, I found them as a positive. I finally found myself not with an abundant staff to do things, so I had to do everything myself, right? So, and that part, honestly, I've really enjoyed. I have brushed up on my PowerPoint skills and other types of things like that I hadn't done in a while, which has been great. And you're getting a chance to get the dirt under your nails, the smell in your nose of the business. And that part I've really, really loved doing. The other part about it that's interesting in, building a company is like you ride the roller coaster. Everything that happens is either a great failure or a great success in your own eyes. And I've liked that. I kind of feel my time in finance and on Wall Street kind of prepared me for that roller coaster ride that exists there, which I've enjoyed. As a CEO, it's great. I think, I am increasingly of the view that the most valuable quality that you can have as a CEO is a service mindset. And it's been great to be in a dynamic where I wake up every day feeling like I'm serving my clients and trying to make their organizations better. And I'm serving the team of Escalera, and putting that into action and being able to build a culture of service in an organization that's for profit, has been a great joy. So I feel great about it. It's demanding. We never worked as hard, but it's great.
And how has the move from the East Coast to the West Coast gone?
That's been interesting. Who doesn't want to pack up their 4 kids, a wife and dog, and trek across the country in the middle of a pandemic, Great Recession, and a little bit of racial unrest. So it's been we have definitely been deeply invested in our resiliency factor. But I'm lucky. I have a awesome wife and great kids, and so they've been excited about it. The one thing that I will say, and this will be an interesting evolution as I spend more time here on the West Coast, it's a little bit of a different language. I do have to say that I think that sometimes the mindset on the East Coast, certainly New York, is a bit of a zero-sum game. It's like there's a pot to be had, and it's all about how big of a slice of the pie that you get. Whereas I found on the West Coast, it's so growth oriented. It's a little bit, 1 + 1 = 5. And I found that for me, very refreshing, invigorating, exciting. The question isn't, how do you do that with less? It's always like, what could you do if you had more? I love that I get to spend a lot of my time in the zone of like what's in the realm of possible, as opposed to, how can you do the most with the least?
Thanks again to Dane Holmes for playing with us this hour. It's very interesting work. Escalera is the name of the organization. We've got some time left in this segment, so I'd like to get to a few of your questions. Let's talk to Timothy. Sometimes I get myself caught in the spokes of the personal finance wheel. This one has been on my mind for a long time. Help me resolve my self-imposed state of disconcertment. I think I have 6 months of emergency funding on hand, but I calculated differently than most experts suggest. I've got 3 months of cash in a high-yield savings account. That's about 25 grand. Then I have a running minimum of $25,000 worth of vacation time banked at my employer. My reasoning is simple. By law, my employer has to pay me for unused vacation time, and there's no chance of my company not having assets to pay for it. My rationale is simple. I have the cash secured for short-term emergencies and the banked vacation time for anything catastrophic like a job loss or hospitalization. I figure why tie up another 25 grand in cash if I've got the vacation time to apply instead? My question is simple. Am I overthinking this? Thanks for all you do. Well, let me ask you this, Tim. What if you just wanted access to that money because something weird happens that's not employment related? Like, I don't know, maybe your boiler blew up or something happened or someone in your family needed help. Could you get that money at any time? That's my question, because I get that they have to pay for it, but do you have a demand that is able to be satisfied at any time? That to me would be the most imperative question. If you can get to it at any time, then sure, that's fine. But if you can't, if it only comes with job separation or injury or illness, I'm not so psyched about it. What do you think, Mark? Yeah, Mark wants you to get all the money out and get your unpaid vacation time and just get the money and get the interest paid because unused vacation time is great, but you're not getting paid any interest. Even though interest rates are rotten, getting paid something is better than nothing. So I don't know, Tim. Let us know. Maybe we're overthinking it. It's Jill on Money. When we return, we're going to get back to answering more of your questions. Jill on Money. We'll be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
You're back. It's Jill on Money, and this is the program that attempts to take the mystery out of your financial life. And it is mysterious times out there. I know, I get it. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is that instead of driving yourself crazy about something going on that is related to your financial life, it could be your job, it could be your tax situation, it could be your retirement, or it could be maybe a conversation that you and your spouse are having and you have some disagreement, send us an email. Let me and Mark be the judge and jury. No, I'm just kidding. But we can help you out. We really can. Just send an email. It's askjill@jillonmoney.com. And by the way, we also have a daily podcast. We're getting a lot of questions from the podcast. So people are mentioning that. I just want to make sure you guys all realize you're listening on terrestrial radio. Mark and I love terrestrial radio. We come from terrestrial radio. But if you'd like to listen to this kind of content on demand, all you have to do is subscribe to our podcast. It is conveniently called Jill on Money. Okay, Naima, I hope that's the right pronunciation, so I apologize if it's not, writes, I'm a new listener of your show. Please know that your podcast has saved me, all caps, from the isolation and loneliness of working from home during a pandemic since March. That said, it did take me a while to write in, but I'd like your insight into my latest financial questions. I'm 39 years old, single, no children. My annual salary is $53,000. I do not own a home, which, like you, I prefer. And I have no debt. I paid off my student loan and credit card debt about a year and a half ago. Woohoo! That's what Naima wrote. Okay, here's the deal, or rather deals. It's a two-pronged issue. My job will no longer be contributing the 8% match to my existing 403B account. It is effective for approximately 1 year, hopefully. Of course, I just began matching their contribution earlier this month after listening to you and my older sister rightly pointing out that not matching leaves the money on the table. Insert facepalm emoji here. Okay, the accounts total $140,000 to date. My plan for this year was to match my 403B 8% and also to open a Roth IRA with Vanguard. I'd put it in the Target 2045 fund. And the Roth IRA was going to be my Christmas gift to myself, so I'm saving for it. Does it still make sense to do this? Or should I contribute the entire 15% towards my 403B? I love, all caps, the idea of the Roth because of the tax-free benefit down the line. But I wonder if the pre-tax option is better for now. Okay, so let's just deal with this question. First, the answer to this question, use the Roth. Absolutely, 100%. You're in such a low tax bracket. You're in the 12% tax bracket. There's no reason to even think about this. So max out the Roth and whatever else, put into the 403B. Okay, that's number one. Next, here's question 2. I've had a whole life insurance policy with AXA Equitable since age 25. The annual premium is $800, face amount of $120,000, death benefit $137,000. The surrender value is $17,000. I've been approved to have this policy increased to $250,000. The premium will double upon doing so. I know your feelings on whole life, but my plan is to leave it alone for my disabled adult nephew upon my death. I was about to destroy this idea, but now that you say that, does it make sense to increase it or leave it alone? Let me know your thoughts. Always sensible and bull jive free. I like bull jive free, Mark. That's a good term. Okay, so here's the deal. You've got a whole life policy. No, I don't think that those are usually very good. But because you are planning for a death benefit that should actually distribute upon your death, not just for this period of time, then yes, I'm okay with it. Here's the thing. Do not increase this policy. Do not. You just don't make a lot of money and leave the policy as is. Keep funding it. And I think that's about the best we can do. I don't want you to feel like you should overfund this. And since you are single, one thing to also keep in mind, if I know that this is for your, a relative, and I want to be clear, but there are some rules around if your disabled adult nephew were to need the money, you may want to just consult an estate attorney about the best way for you to plan for that. Because in some cases, you may want that money to come through a different vehicle than life insurance, because we don't want to preclude him from claiming some Social Security disability benefits down the line. So you may just want to chat with an attorney about that just to get an opinion. I, again, I don't think it's not, this is not a bad thing. It's just really understanding what are the rules around how someone who is disabled can receive money without disrupting their ability to claim benefits that are due to them. Okay. So check that out with somebody who has at least a little bit of a background in it. Okay. Ah, what a nice person. Thank you so much for writing. Appreciate that. If you have a question, all we want to do is hear from you. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. That is our email address. If you're on the website, poking around with all the fun stuff we got on the website, all you have to do is click the contact button. That contact button is in the upper right-hand corner at jillonmoney.com. And while you're there, you can always sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can buy my book, and you can check out all the other content that we create all the time. We are content machines. That's what Mark and I do. We create content. Jill on Money will be right back. You're back. It's Jill on Money, and we are broadcasting from the Policy Genius virtual studios. Policy Genius is the easy way to compare and buy insurance. Just go to policygenius.com. Just like that. So easy. All right, let's get to one more question. This is from Bruce, who says, my wife and I each have traditional IRAs with one fund family, USAA, and a Roth IRA with another, Vanguard. We are both over the age of 70. My wife is still employed. I am retired. We are thinking of converting each of our traditional IRAs into Roth IRAs. Can we convert and create new Roth IRA accounts with USAA, or must we transfer rollover funds to the existing Roth IRAs at Vanguard? The mutual funds within each existing traditional IRA at USAA are doing okay. I'd prefer to stay with them in a new Roth IRA and at USAA if possible. Well, you can totally do it at USAA. There's no problem with that. But you can't just magically make the money stay in the fund. You would actually have to take the money out, and then I think it goes to the money market, and then you'd have to reinvest. And so because of that, I would be very careful and really consider the costs that are involved, because USAA funds are definitely going to be more expensive than Vanguard funds. So that's something for you to consider. But yes, you can certainly start a new Roth IRA account at USAA if you'd like to keep the whole thing there. Also might be easier to manage. Right. And Mark makes a great point, which is it doesn't matter whether you have two separate accounts. The total amount of money that you can contribute is $7,000. So it's not like you could put $7,000 in Vanguard and $7,000 at USAA. So just remember that. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And if you've missed any part of this program, do go to the website, jillonmoney.com. And don't forget, very important, gang, to wash your hands, wear your masks, maintain your physical distancing, try to do something nice for someone else today. I want to thank all of you for listening. Our music is composed by Joel Goodman. Mark Talercio is our executive producer, and we'll talk to you next week.